Everyone is watching the wrong player. When Caitlin Clark stepped onto the court for the Indiana Fever, the entire basketball world lost control. TV ratings exploded. Arenas sold out overnight. Debate shows couldn't stop talking. Every headline, every camera, every spotlight locked onto one name: Clark. And that's exactly why nobody saw what was coming next. Because while the world was obsessed with the phenomenon, two players were quietly building something far more dangerous behind the scenes. Sophie Cunningham and Lexie. They weren't chasing attention. They weren't trying to go viral. They were evolving. Not slightly improving. Not making small adjustments. They were completely rewriting who they were as players, silently. Because when a player like Caitlin Clark enters your league, everything changes. The pace changes. The expectations change. And the margin for survival disappears. You don't get time to adjust. You either adapt or you disappear. There is no middle ground. Most players resist that kind of pressure. Some complain. Some wait for the system to slow down for them. But Cunningham and Hull did something far more ruthless. They weaponized it. This is not a story about Caitlin Clark. This is a story about what happens in the shadow of greatness, and the two players who turned that shadow into one of the most calculated transformations the WNBA has ever seen. Let's be honest. If you asked most fans who dominated the headlines when everything changed, they'd say Clark. And they wouldn't be wrong. But they'd still be missing the real story. Because while the spotlight burned brighter than ever, Cunningham and Hull were operating in the dark, where real change happens. To understand how extreme this transformation is, you need to understand who Sophie Cunningham used to be. For years, she built her identity on physicality. She wasn't just a role player. She was an enforcer. The kind of player who set punishing screens, absorbed contact, and pushed back against anyone who tried to intimidate her team. She played with controlled aggression, with edge, with purpose. That identity made her valuable. It made her respected. It kept her on the floor in a league that moves on quickly from players who stop being useful. But then she studied the system. She watched the film. She analyzed the pace. She understood how Caitlin Clark's offense actually works at full speed. And she realized something most athletes are afraid to admit. The version of herself that worked for years no longer fit. Most players would ignore that. Some would deny it. Others would wait until it was too late. Cunningham didn't. She made the decision immediately. She replaced herself before the system could replace her. This wasn't a small adjustment. This was extreme. She dropped significant body weight, transforming from a physical enforcer into a faster, lighter, more efficient version of herself. For an elite athlete, that's not just weight loss. That's a complete reset. A change that affects speed, endurance, recovery, and explosiveness all at once. And she did it while recovering from injury. Because in this system, every pound matters. Every extra bit of weight becomes pressure on your joints. Every fraction of a second determines whether you're open or left behind. The pace is relentless. And the margin for error is almost zero. Caitlin Clark doesn't just play fast. She changes the structure of the game. Her vision forces defenses to react before they're ready. Her passing stretches the floor in ways that create instant scoring opportunities. But only for players who can keep up. If you're a wing player, there's a moment in transition where everything opens up. If you run at the right time, if you beat your defender, if you reach the spot fast enough, the ball finds you perfectly. But that window is tiny. Miss it and the opportunity disappears. Cunningham saw that. And instead of hoping it would work out, she made sure she would never miss that window again. She also learned from watching Aaliyah Boston. Boston struggled early, not because she lacked talent, but because the system demanded a different pace, a different level of conditioning, a different rhythm. It took time to adjust. Time that cost performance. Cunningham refused to go through that phase. She adapted before the season even began. Now she's different. Faster. More explosive. More efficient. No longer just a physical presence. She's a system player built for speed and spacing. A catch-and-shoot threat. A transition runner. A player designed to maximize every pass coming from Clark. And when that pass comes, she plans to be ready every single time. But here's where things take a turn. Because all of this work, all of this transformation might not matter. Everything depends on one decision: the direction chosen by head coach Stephanie White. There are two paths this team can take. One embraces the chaos, fast pace, quick decisions, full commitment to Clark's style. The other slows things down, balances touches, prioritizes structure, keeps everyone comfortable. On paper, the second option sounds safe. But in reality, it could undo everything. Because you don't take a generational talent and limit it. You don't slow it down to fit everyone else. You build around it. Completely. Cunningham and Hull understood that before anyone confirmed it. They didn't wait for instructions. They didn't wait for guarantees. They made the bet early. They reshaped their careers around what this team could become. Now the question is simple. Did they just make the smartest move in modern women's basketball, or the biggest gamble of their careers? Because if the system fully commits to Caitlin Clark, they're perfectly built for it. But if it doesn't, all of this transformation means nothing. This is exactly where Lexie Hull becomes the most dangerous and most misunderstood piece of the entire puzzle. Because while everyone is arguing about superstars, headlines, and highlight reels, the real decision that could define the Indiana Fever season isn't about a star at all. It's about a role player. And not just any role player. The right kind. Hull represents something most fans don't fully appreciate. She is the blueprint, the prototype, the exact model of what modern basketball now demands from a 3 and D wing, and she executes it with a level of discipline that almost feels invisible. She doesn't demand the ball. She doesn't need isolation plays. She doesn't measure her value in shot attempts or headlines. She measures it in impact. Relentless perimeter defense that suffocates opposing guards. Floor spacing that forces defenses into impossible decisions. Endless movement that never allows a possession to stagnate. She plays the game without ego. And that's precisely what makes her so valuable and so easy to overlook. But when Hull shares the floor with Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham, something strange happens. Something most people can feel, but very few can explain. The geometry of the game changes. The court stretches. Passing lanes appear where none should exist. Defenders hesitate, not because they're unsure, but because there is no correct decision. 3 players who can shoot. 3 players who can defend. And in the center of it all, a point guard who sees the game seconds before it actually happens. It becomes less like basketball and more like a system operating at a speed the human brain struggles to process. And yet, despite all of this, there is still a real possibility that this lineup doesn't hold. Because history has a way of repeating itself in the worst possible moments. Coaching staffs, no matter how experienced, have a habit of overthinking the obvious. There's always pressure. Pressure to reward veterans. Pressure to respect reputations. Pressure to give minutes to players with longer resumes, louder voices, and stronger expectations. And that pressure can quietly destroy what works best. Last season, that's exactly what happened. There were stretches where Hull was pulled out of the lineup, replaced by slower, higher usage veterans. On paper, it made sense. More experience, more shot creation, more balance. But on the court, everything broke. The spacing collapsed. The movement slowed. The rhythm disappeared. And suddenly, Caitlin Clark, the most dynamic offensive engine in the game, was forced into something she was never meant to be, an isolation player. The ball stopped moving. The system stopped breathing. And the entire identity of the team started to unravel. Then something almost eerie would happen. Hull would step back onto the floor, and everything would snap back into place. Like flipping a switch. Passing lanes reopened. The floor stretched again. The transition game came alive. The chaos returned, but this time, it was controlled, directed, lethal. The numbers supported it. The film confirmed it. The difference wasn't subtle, it was undeniable. And yet, here's the twist nobody wants to admit. That still might not be enough. Because the biggest threat to this system isn't talent. It isn't chemistry. It isn't even the opposing teams. It's decision-making. With Stephanie White now leading the team, everything hangs in the balance. Not because she lacks experience, but because she has too much of it. Experience brings instincts. And instincts can be dangerous in a system that requires breaking tradition. There are two paths in front of her. One is bold. Commit fully to Clark's pace. Build around speed, spacing, and constant motion. Accept that not everyone will get touches. Accept that some veterans will be uncomfortable. The other path? Safer, slower, more balanced, more familiar. And that's where things become complicated. Because the safe choice is actually the most dangerous one. If Hull is not in that starting lineup, this system doesn't just weaken, it fundamentally changes. And not in a good way. But just when you think this story is only about basketball, it takes a turn that almost nobody sees coming. Because while fans argue about rotations and analysts debate lineups, Lexie Hull is playing an entirely different game. Off the court. And she might be winning it at a level no one in the league has ever reached before. Historically, role players in the WNBA have lived within a very specific reality. League salaries, overseas contracts, endless grinding just to maintain financial stability. The spotlight and the money rarely extended beyond the superstars. But Hull saw something others didn't. A loophole. An opening created by something bigger than basketball itself. Proximity. She plays next to Caitlin Clark. And in today's sports economy, that is the most valuable real estate imaginable. Because Clark doesn't just bring attention. She creates an ecosystem. Millions of eyes. Constant coverage. Relentless engagement. And Hull? She's right there. Every game. Every broadcast. Every moment. While traditional brands spend millions trying to capture attention, Hull doesn't need to spend anything. She already has it. Organically. Consistently. At scale. And instead of letting that attention fade, she's converting it, building something of her own. A direct-to-consumer brand designed for athletes. Not as a side project, not as a hobby, but as a calculated move to turn visibility into ownership. This is where everything shifts. Because now, this isn't just about surviving in the league. It's about escaping its limitations entirely. While others wait for bigger contracts, Hull is building independent wealth. While others negotiate for a larger slice, she's creating her own pie. And suddenly, the hierarchy changes. Not publicly, not officially, but structurally. Because the players who understand this new reality are separating themselves from the ones who don't. And that leads to the most uncomfortable truth of all. The league is dividing. Not by talent, not by experience, but by adaptation. On one side, players like Cunningham and Hull. Players who saw the future early. Who changed their bodies, their roles, their strategies. Who accepted the new system and rebuilt themselves to fit it. On the other side, players still resisting. Still expecting the game to bend to them. Still relying on reputation instead of evolution. And in a league changing this fast, that gap becomes permanent. Because talent alone is no longer enough. Not here. Not anymore. The WNBA that exists today will not exist in a few years. It will be faster, sharper, more demanding, less forgiving. And the players who didn't adapt in time, they won't fade slowly. They'll disappear all at once. Cunningham understood that. She sacrificed her identity to survive. Hull understood it too. But she went further. She didn't just adapt to the system. She expanded beyond it. And that's the twist. Because this entire time, while everyone thought this was about Caitlin Clark changing the league, the real story is about the players changing themselves to survive her. Some are evolving. Some are resisting. And some, like Lexie Hull, are doing both. The real season hasn't even started yet. But the outcome? It's already being decided. Quietly. Behind the scenes. The question was never whether Caitlin Clark would change the game. The question is, who is changing fast enough to survive what comes next? What nobody is saying out loud is that this situation inside the Indiana Fever is far more fragile than it looks from the outside. From a distance, it feels like momentum. It feels like growth. It feels like a team on the edge of something special. But inside, it's pressure. Constant. Unforgiving. And building every single day. Because when you have a player like Caitlin Clark, the expectations don't rise gradually. They spike. Instantly. Every possession becomes a test. Every game becomes a statement. Every decision becomes magnified. And that kind of environment doesn't just expose weaknesses in opponents, it exposes everything inside your own team. This is where things get complicated. Because systems like this, fast, explosive, built around a generational talent, don't just require skill. They require sacrifice. And not the kind of sacrifice fans celebrate. Not highlight plays. Not big shots. The uncomfortable kind. Fewer touches. Less recognition. Smaller roles. And not every player is built for that. This is the part of the story most people avoid. Because it's not easy to talk about. But it's real. There are players in that locker room right now who know exactly what's happening. They see the shift. They feel the change. And they understand something that hasn't been fully acknowledged yet. This is no longer a balanced team. This is a system. And systems don't treat everyone equally. They prioritize efficiency over emotion, production over reputation, fit over history. That's why players like Lexie become essential. And why others, no matter how talented, start to feel out of place. Because when the offense runs through Clark at full speed, there are only two types of players who thrive. Those who move without the ball, and those who can finish instantly when it arrives. Everyone else? They slow things down. And in this system, slowing down is the one thing you cannot afford. Now, imagine being a veteran player. Someone who has spent years earning respect, building a reputation, establishing a role. And suddenly, the game no longer rewards the things that made you valuable. That's not just a tactical adjustment. That's an identity crisis. And identity crises don't stay quiet. They show up in subtle ways. A hesitation on a pass. A missed rotation. A moment of frustration when the ball doesn't come. Tiny cracks. But in a system like this, tiny cracks spread fast. This is where Sophie Cunningham made the decision that separates her from almost everyone else. She didn't wait for those cracks to appear. She eliminated the possibility entirely. She didn't just adapt physically. She adapted mentally. She accepted something most players never fully accept. This isn't about me anymore. And paradoxically, that's exactly what made her more valuable than ever. Because when you stop chasing the system and start feeding it, you become impossible to replace. But not everyone has reached that point. Not yet. And that's where the real tension lives. Because while the outside world sees unity, there is an unspoken question inside that locker room. Who is truly bought in and who is just surviving? That question doesn't get answered in interviews. It gets answered in moments. Late-game possessions. Defensive rotations. Split-second decisions under pressure. Moments where instinct takes over. Where players don't have time to think. Only react. And in those moments you see the truth. You see who trusts the system. And who doesn't. Now add another layer to this. Coaching. Because no matter how well players adapt, everything still runs through one final filter. Stephanie White, and here's the uncomfortable reality. She's not just managing a team. She's managing a transition. From old basketball to something completely new. That's not easy. Because every decision she makes carries consequences beyond the court. If she leans too far into the Clark system, she risks alienating veterans, losing trust, losing balance. But if she pulls back, if she slows things down, if she tries to keep everyone happy, she risks something even worse, breaking the system entirely. And once that happens, it's almost impossible to fix. Because systems built on speed and trust don't recover from hesitation. They collapse. That's the knife's edge this team is living on. Every game, every rotation, every lineup decision. And this is where the story takes another turn. Because while all of this tension builds internally, externally, something else is happening. The spotlight around Caitlin Clark is not slowing down. It's accelerating. More attention, more coverage, more pressure. And that creates a ripple effect. Because the bigger Clark becomes, the more valuable everyone around her becomes. Not just on the court, but off it. And that changes behavior. It changes priorities. It changes how players think about their future. Some will lean into it, build around it, use it as leverage. Others, they'll resist it, feel overshadowed, feel replaced. And that emotional divide is where teams either elevate or fracture. Because chemistry isn't built in easy moments. It's built in pressure. And right now, the pressure is only getting heavier. Which brings everything back to one unavoidable truth. This isn't just a basketball story anymore. It's a survival story. A test of who can evolve fast enough, mentally, physically, strategically, to exist in a system that never slows down. Cunningham made her choice. Hull made hers. But the rest of the roster? They're still deciding. And that decision, whether they realize it or not, will determine everything. Because in the end, this isn't about talent. It's not about potential. It's about alignment. And in a system built around a player like Caitlin Clark, alignment isn't optional.